Hey, Thursday. What's up? Let's do a little morning knife review, breakfast review. Yerba mate, not the hard stuff yet. Anyways, today's video is an unprepped video, so I'm just going off the cuff. Any corrections, feel free to make them in the comments. But today's video is on a company called DPx Gear. DPx Gear's been out since 2008, brainchild of Robert Young Pelton, who was a Canadian-born dude who became a journalist, and his specialty was being dropped in war zones to record what was happening around the world in active war zones. That was his shtick. Would later move to California and drop his life there, and from there again, like I said, came up with the company DPx Gear, which stood for Dangerous Places Extreme, and that was his brainchild. And they developed, or he developed, while in the field for the years that he spent as a journalist, embedded in these war-torn territories, developed a fixed blade that he had sketched out while he was out in the field. A utilitarian knife was something that he wanted to have on him that was different from what was out there. So he made basically maybe a little under 8-inch rough draft of a knife, fixed blade, that was later produced by Rowan here in the U.S. I believe it was made from D2 steel initially, or it could have been 1095. I'm not sure. I know that when they reissued it not too long ago, Tor Knives helped produce the original HEST, which was Hostile Environment Survival Tool. That's what that meant. So he used a lot of acronyms for all of his knives, or for the bulk of them anyways. So that was his fixed blade. Later on, shortly after Rowan produced the fixed blades, Robert Young Pelton decided, either by himself or with others, to come up with a folding knife that would mimic what the fixed blade was capable of, which was, in this case, the folder was called the HEST/F, so Hostile Environments Survival Tool /F for folder. And Robert took that idea. He went to Lion Steel over in Italy, which is a big company, knife making company that supports a lot of brands and very well known. And he came out with a folder, and this was probably around 2009, 2010. I'd imagine, could be more specific, but somewhere in there, the folder came out, which was a G10, scale on one side, titanium on the other. They had what they called a roto block, which the roto block allowed the knife to get into a fixed position and stay there. That was met with a lukewarm response. Some people thought that was cool. Others thought it was dumb. Sometimes the roto block would stick. Sometimes it wouldn't even work. I owned plenty of knives back then by DPx that had the roto block, and it was kind of weird, but to each his own. The knife, surprisingly, however, did pretty well, and there were many iterations of that knife that were produced, most of them with D2 steel, some of them with Nylox, Slepner. The probably best steel that was used for the folder on the Mr. DPX versions, it had the Mr. DPX logo ingrained in the G10. They used Elmax, and Elmax back then was, it was a hell of a steel. It was being used here in the U.S. It was also being used over in Europe, but it was a really good steel. I don't know if you'd call it a super steel, but at the time that was like top dog, and that was over a decade ago. And steels have all improved since then, but I still think Elmax was still, to this day, is still a good steel. So, anyways, I'm getting to it. Bear with me, but the meat and potatoes here of it. I just want to provide a background again on DPx before I showcase the knife. But that was, again, DPx started in production in the U.S., moved to Lion Steel, made a folder, then made more fixed blades that were bigger for field use. Those, I believe, were called the Heft, which was Hostile Environment Field Tool. And those were like 9 inches long. They had like a can opener on the back, which was kind of interesting. But the blades were nice G10 scales, and they had some different variations of field knives. And in that time period, that these came out, or shortly before that, Robert Young Pelton was embedded with the U.S. troops and Blackwater during the Iraq 30-year Iraq War. But anyway, the earlier part of it, anyways. And during that time, they did a few knives for Blackwater, or that were Blackwater focused, and then he did one for the Navy SEALs, and they were like maybe 250 units tops that were produced. So those were some other specialties that Robert did. Later on, probably around 2014 or 15, ideas were being kicked around to finally do a blade that was made in the US of A, which, aside from Rowan, Robert hadn't done anything with a USA knife maker or made anything in the USA yet. So in 16 was the Kickstarter program for a new knife that was going to be called the DPx Gear Hest/Urban. And this was going to be a smaller knife that would mimic the folding knife, the Hest F, but on a smaller scale and made here in the USA. And what came out of all that was the Urban, which was produced by Southern Grind. And the Urban was again, smaller pocket knife that had all the little features, shrunk down. So a bunch of versions of this were produced. They was a folding knife, frame lock, glass tip breaker, jimping that was also wire strippers. You had your bottle opener / wave feature, and all the majority of these were all TI. This is PVD coated in black. The blade is PVD coated. This one was called the Raven, and this was off of one of the many articles, prose that he wrote. There was a book called The Raven. There was also a fixed blade, about 11 or 12 inches, currently bidding on that, by the way, that was also produced. That was the Raven, but that was years before the onset of the Urbans, or the creation of the Urbans. But there were many of these produced, again, by Southern Grind. And also, White River here in the U.S. also helped produce some of the smaller little tools that Robert developed or had an idea about. And recently, the big fixed blades were reintroduced with Magna Cut steel, and those were done by White River, if I'm correct. But getting back to the Urban is a small pocket knife. Like all of Robert Young's ideas, they're all based around functionality. Some people like that in a knife, some people do not. Some people just want a knife to cut, and they don't like all the doodads or the added features, if you will. Some people, like myself, do. And I think that's, that's his audience. You either like DPx gear or you don't, in a way. It is what it is. But the Urban, again, is a nice little pocket knife. If you need something small to carry with you and you can't take a fixed blade, like I cannot take a fixed blade to work, that's impossible. But I can take this little guy that's going to get the job done for what I need it for. And these are still being produced. However, they are now being produced by, and they just came out a few months ago, Lion Steel, whose idea at the time of the Kickstarter was to have a flipper tab on this. And that was nixed. Okay, so mind you, 2016, 17, that idea was nixed. They ran with the thumb stud, bilateral thumb studs, no flipper tab. Recently, again, within the last few months, or this year in general, the Urban was produced by Lion Steel with the flipper tab. And, the price point for those, even these when they came out, was what, $400, $395, something like that. Did not pay anywhere near that for these. You can still find a number of Urbans on the secondary market. They were limited. Most of them were limited to like 250, like a batch of 250. And again, there were all kind of different versions of this. There were two types of copper and titanium combos, G10 and titanium combos. full TI combos, and some of those still fetch a few dollars. Others you can find on the secondary market, Arizona Custom Knives, every once in a while Chicago Knife Works, and eBay itself for an urban. So anyways, that was a little bit of a diarrhea of the mouth, but kind of wanted to paint the backdrop on DPx Gear. Again, a company that is really based on functionality with their knives, and who now have partnerships with Europe, i.e. Lion Steel, and then had partnerships with Rowan, White River, and Southern Grind. So that is, again, DPx. If you like them, you can find a lot of their blades, again, on the secondary market, fixed blades and the folders. Even the reissued Hest folder came in TI, full TI, textured titanium scales, and as well as some of the better blade steels you can find for really like 200, maybe 250. Now they've really come down. But again, if you're a pro US guy, then you want to go after the pro US knives that he made. If you don't care and you just like all of his work, then you have, wow, a plethora of knives to pick and choose from. So there you have it. DPx Gear, Hest Urban, just a little under 7 inches. Good for your everyday pocket carry. The Raven. All right, that's it. I'll talk to you guys later. Any corrections, feel free to drop a line in the comment section below. I'm up for the banter. Have a good one.